and they have really become a financial liability for the county. Uh, in my lifetime, and I've lived in a very narrow life in Los Angeles County, but the idea of having 18 deputies, 18 police officers indicted at one time by the federal government, that is astounding, to say the least. My question very flat out is, how will you, when you're elected, reform the jails? And Mr. Vince, let me just start with you, please.
Well, I mentioned it before, and specifically how I reform the jails is that, like I said before, there's only been 4 sheriffs in 82 years. You ask the sheriff's department, why did deputies come out of the academy where they spent their time learning how to be cops on the street and only a little bit of time being jailers, why they go straight into the jails? They say, that's the way we've always done it. I'm going to turn that on its ear. It's going to be professionalized, and that may mean civilian, not full-fledged sworn deputies, people that are in the jail system, people that maybe study sociology, psychology, maybe therapists, people that want to be there and work on a career path and be there for 30 years and be happy. Some of you own a business or work in a business. If you have a person, in this case a deputy, doing a job they don't want to do for 6, 8 years, marking off the time like an inmate marks off the time, you're going to get less than stellar performance. So I'm going to stop that. Now that's the nuts and bolts mechanics of what I want to do there. But in general, from a leadership perspective, the leader sets the tone. You can't have executives or leaders saying that it's okay to work the gray area and be violent with inmates if they disrespect you. You need to set the expectations and follow up and make sure that those expectations are being met. If I find that any deputy that is engaged in excessive force or anything like that in the jails, that's serious misconduct, be disciplined up to including termination. In addition, the case presented to the district attorney's office for filing consideration. We can't run our jail system like that. If someone commits a crime, they can expect to go to jail, but they can't expect to face violence from people that are supposed to protect them.
Thank you. I was a captain in Mid Central Jail. I was asked to go there in the very end of 06 and 07. They said this was the height of the problems going on within the organization in Mid Central Jail at that particular time. I identified the problem immediately with all the excessive force that was going on. During the year from 07 into 08, I lowered force at Mid Central Jail by over 25%. I did it with no more money, no more deputies, no more supervision, and no cameras. I did it by holding people accountable, managing by walking around, by being there, opening up doors, opening up drawers, asking the hard and tough questions. I've been there, I've done it, it can be done, it's not hard to do. As sheriff, that's exactly what I'm going to do. If the problem's up in the North County because we're violating the 4th and 14th Amendments of the citizens up there, I'm going to be up there. If it's going to be at Compton because we're doing aerial drones, then I'm going to be down there. I need to go where the problems are. You inspect what you expect out of that particular behavior. The sad part is that when I got promoted and the force went up and I went to report it to my boss and say we need to move the captain who was violating the problems there, both my boss, his boss, Paul Tanaka, and Lee Baca, and the last 2 each on 2 separate occasions, failed to do anything about it. And at that particular point is when I went outside the organization and reported to the FBI. It was the right thing to do. You take an oath in life, you uphold the Constitution. If that's what it is, you just got to call it as you see it.
I agree with a lot of what Lou said, but let's not forget that LAPD, they don't send their people to the jails, and they had Rampart. Long Beach PD, they don't send their officers to the jails, and they just shot an unarmed man on the beach. So it's not necessarily the jail's fault. The fault lies with the leadership. We had a failure of leadership. We had the wrong messaging sent to the deputies who were working the jails. It was okay to step over that line, to work in that gray area we hear about, to kick butt and take names. This is our jail. We're going to run it. All those things. And that encouraged deputies to use force that was more than they needed to use. And sometimes they didn't need to use it at all. It was unreasonable. It was excessive. And there was no accountability until recently. We need to hold deputies accountable. When they step over the line and they use excessive or unreasonable force, they have lost their privilege to be a member of the law enforcement profession, and they lose their jobs. We also need to hold supervisors accountable. In my 29 years on the Sheriff's Department, when I see deputies get in trouble, it's frequently because some sergeant lieutenant failed to do his or her job. They need to be held accountable for it as well. And I do agree that we need to professionalize the jail operation We need to continue with the implementation of our dual track where we assign people to the jails who want to be in the jails, let them do their career in the jails with a career path, and we'll let the people who don't want to be there, if they want to work patrol, the courts, wherever, let them move on to where they want to go. There's a difference between wanting to take people to jail and wanting to run a constitutional jail, and we have people that want to do each. We need to put them in those right places. Thank you.
Well, we definitely, to reform the jails back to all of our expectations, people need to be held accountable, as was described here. And I was brought in as a commander after the allegations of misconduct in the jails to do exactly that. We had to terminate some people. We had to severely discipline people. Then for future success, we came up with the policies, the supervision, and the training to ensure future success. But then we're in the process of now developing oversight, which has been approved. As far as the funding for that mechanism, now we just kind of have to develop how exactly we're going to inspect. And so those are a lot of things that are in the works. So we're on the path to clean up the jails. But we need to ensure this long-term success by accountability, expectations, and then just strong, one critique I would have of Mr. Baca is that he did not hold people accountable for those failures of leadership. And they were in command positions of those jails, and when they went awry, and there's no doubt about it that it got to a level where it had to go outside of the department because voices were not heard, and so people were held accountable, or people were not held accountable, and that's exactly what went wrong. So he could have honest intentions, which I believe he did, but if he wasn't holding people accountable at the end of the day, that was the problem in the jails, and so I'll make sure that I have that accountability measure when we run our jails.
Okay, Mr. Olmsted, you'll start us off in this next question, and this is a big question. For the longest, it's historical within law enforcement that there's this us, members of the department, versus them, anybody who's not a member of the department. And consequently, we often hear about the kinds of things that we hear about our sheriff's department, 18 folks being indicted because they don't get supervised or reprimanded, and so forth and so on. My question to you is this. When citizens' violent attacks on each other were going down, ironically, incidents, specifically shootings, when resident shootings of each others were going down, ironically, deputy or police-involved shootings of residents were going up. And in that, there were a horrendous number of obviously questionable shootings. Unfortunately, there was a young lady that just lost her life, a member of the community, right at the same spot where a deputy a year ago took the life of a man. And as it turned out, this person was shot 5 times in the back. Now, my question to you is this. In those incidences of obviously faulty, questionable shootings, we know that the district attorney is the only person or entity that has the authority to bring criminal charges against deputies. How proactive will you be in moving the district attorney to review those obviously faulty shootings in the perhaps of filing criminal charges when they seem obviously necessary?
If you take a look at what transpired, what you're going to find out, and we've talked about it already, is a catastrophic failure of leadership. Let me tell you kind of the history of what I'm talking about just very quickly. When I announced I was running for sheriff the next day, Paul Tanaka announced he was running for sheriff. He's the number 2 guy in the department, who ran the department. And when they put a microphone in front of him, said, "What do you think of Bob Olmsted entering the race?" And his response was, "I was not raised to be a whistleblower." Listen to that. I was not raised to be a whistleblower. What he's saying on the number 2 guy is maintain the code of silence. The problems we have here is not the DAs, is not how it's really being handled so much as the failed leadership that allowed it to get to where it's at and not be aggressive to investigate these type of things. Paul Tanaka is talking about working the gray area constantly. He talks about having 50 IA investigators, that's 49 too many. He's got a neo-Nazi racist tattoo on his ankle. He should never have been promoted to undersheriff. It's this failed leadership of the organization that got us where we're at. As sheriff, I'm going to be held accountable. I'm going to charge everybody in the situation to get to the truth of what transpired, whatever it might be. If it's good, bad, or indifferent, it doesn't make any difference. The truth will always prevail, and that's what I have to march forward with the DA's office.
Mr. Roberts?
One of the frustrations we've had for a long time was the fact that we have a deputy-involved shooting. It goes to an internal affairs investigation, and it takes basically a year before there's any disposition of that investigation. That is way too long for closure for anybody who's involved in that incident. So I created what we call a critical incident review process. Proposed it to the former sheriff, I chaired it, I set this thing up, I wrote the policy on it. And basically what it requires is that when we have a deputy-involved shooting or any other types of critical incident where deadly force is used, that incident has to be reviewed the following week, within days of the incident. Now, we can't impose discipline, we can't fire deputies because we do have to follow the Peace Officer Bill of Rights and go through the investigative process, but everything else is analyzed through that process. And unfortunately, the unions don't like it too much because it results in sometimes deputies being transferred, sometimes they have to go to some training, sometimes we change department policy as a result of it. But the point is that we're being proactive. Within days of these things happening, this sheriff's department is mobilizing and taking action on it. And then the investigative process, by the way, through that process, we can expedite that administrative investigation to make sure that justice is served when we have deputies who are out there using excessive force. So we can complete the case, we can submit it to the district attorney's office before that year is up, hopefully way before the year is up, and then get a filing decision. And I will work with the DA. When we have criminal acts, those deputies need to be prosecuted, and they'll be fined. Thank you.
When it comes to officer or deputy-involved shootings, that's the core of trust and expectations for accountability. We all know that there are some dangerous felons that are out there creating havoc in our communities, and that's the great thing that I learned from my friends in Compton and Los Angeles and everywhere that I've served is that nobody wants to have our families endangered, but what we're talking about is when it's a senseless shooting or an unarmed situation that occurs. And so we have to ensure that there's a proper investigation, there's proper oversight. One of the things that was alarming that we found out, for example, in the jail commission, we're not talking about shootings, but we're talking about uses of force, is that there wasn't even proper investigations done. And so it wasn't so much, yes, it was one level that there was a use of force that was deemed to be excessive, but then part two of the obstruction of justice was the fact that it wasn't even properly investigated. That's a whole other level right there, because we're talking about potential misconduct and now it's not even being investigated properly. That's a problem. So what we need to have from a sheriff is somebody who's assertive, is open to the criticisms that we hear, because guess what? In those criticisms, there may be some serious truth, and it may be the very information that we need to hold people accountable. So we need to be totally open and transparent.
It's not going to take me a minute and a half to explain that I'm going to work with the DA. I'm going to work with the DA and make sure they get all the information that they need. I even alluded to it in my previous answers before this question came up. But what struck me about this question is something that was said. In asking this question, he said, there's been this mentality of us versus them. That can't continue. As your sheriff, I know that the community are the police and the police are the community. It's not two separate and distinct groups. It's two groups, but they're working towards the same goal. And the sheriff's department needs a whole cultural reboot. Part of that is not starting off in the jail, but part of that is the new expectations coming from the top. We can't have a sheriff that you can't just trade one person for another and expect a different outcome. In this election, you really have that choice. We're going to have the status quo with the people that have been there doing it, and in a lot of these answers you hear in a history lesson. I agree with the history, but what are we going to do something different? Specifically, to try to reduce force, we need more equipment and we need more training. Every single officer should have a taser. Nowadays, 21st century policing, it's like having a pencil. Everybody should have one, but everyone doesn't have one on the sheriff's department. We can avoid a lot of these things with the right tools and the proper training.
Wow.
we're nearing our allotted time, and I want to, at least right now, as we get close to our time, I still have a couple of questions to ask you. But I do want to thank each of you for your honesty and brevity in which you're answering our questions. Thank you. When we began, you heard me mention that primarily we're asking questions from the point of view of the black and brown community. This next question primarily has more of an impact on our brown neighbors, many of which are our relatives. So I'm going to ask you, we hear a lot of talk about it with other police departments, but I've never heard this discussion about this from the sheriff department. And that is, what is your operating procedure with the immigration officers from the federal government? Does the sheriff department, what is their policy and procedure for stopping people who are primarily Hispanic or Mexican? What kind of obligation or relationship do you have with those immigration agencies in terms of maintaining their confidence of those persons? Mr. Rogers, would you start us off, please?
Thank you. We are the law enforcement agency for everybody in the county of Los Angeles, and we need to make sure that everybody who lives in this county, regardless of their legal status in this country, trusts us enough to call us if they have a need for law enforcement services. So that's number one. We do not have a policy of stopping people to check on their immigration status. Now, we do have a relationship with the federal government in the jail system, but I am proud that I recently recommended to the interim sheriff that we adopt formally the Trust Act. And you all know what the Trust Act is, basically meaning that we will only cooperate with the deportation of the most serious criminals that come into the LA County jail system, and I support that. If we have people who are out there killing people, who are out there abusing kids, child abuse suspects, things like that, they need to go. They're human predators, and they come into the jail system, they can go back to their home country. We don't need them in our communities. But when it comes to minor offenses, I told you the history about my family before. My